The Galactic Academy's Xenobiology wing had seen many unusual teaching methods over its 3 centuries of operation, but none quite as controversial as Professor Thane's latest experiment. The towering Krelian instructor stood at the observation deck, his 4 eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity as he prepared to release 2 juvenile Vexhounds into Lecture Hall 7B. "This will prove my thesis," Thane muttered to his assistant, a nervous Plixian who clutched her datapad with trembling appendages. "Apex predators can sense weakness. The human will fail." Below, Dr. Ilara Venn stood at her podium, reviewing notes for her lecture on comparative anatomy. She was the only human on the xenobiology faculty, a fact that had generated considerable debate among the more traditional instructors. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, their homeworld only discovered 40 years prior. Many questioned whether such a young species possessed the temperament for serious academia. Ilara adjusted her glasses and glanced at her audience. 17 students representing 9 different species, all enrolled in advanced predator behavior. The syllabus had warned of practical demonstrations, but she hadn't expected them quite so soon. The ceiling panels slid open with a pneumatic hiss. 2 creatures descended on anti-gravity platforms. Rick and Sari, twin Vexhound cubs, each the size of a large earth dog covered in iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. Their 6 legs ended in retractable claws, and their mouths contained rows of crystalline teeth designed to shear through molecular bonds. Even as cubs, they were formidable. The students collectively recoiled. 3 of them activated personal shields. A Dravine student made a sound like grinding metal, his species equivalent of whimpering. Ilara set down her stylus and observed the cubs with professional interest. Vexhounds were native to Krelos Prime, a high-gravity world where evolution had forged them into perfect hunters. Their senses could detect fear pheromones from 300 meters. They were, by any measure, dangerous. The platforms touched ground and retracted. Rick and Sari stood motionless for exactly 3 heartbeats, processing their new environment. Then they began to move. Professor Thane leaned forward in the observation deck, anticipating the chaos. Vexhounds always attacked the weakest target first. The human, with her soft skin and fragile bones, would surely trigger their predatory instincts. This would demonstrate once and for all that humans lack the physical presence required for xenobiology fieldwork. But something unexpected happened. Rick's head swiveled toward Ilara, nostrils flaring. Sari followed her brother's gaze. For a moment, every being in the lecture hall held their breath. Then Rick chirped, a high-pitched sound that Vexhounds made only in the presence of their parents, and bounded toward the podium. Sari followed immediately, their claws clicking against the polished floor. The students gasped. One screamed. But Ilara didn't move. She simply crouched down, making herself smaller, and extended one hand palm up. "Hello there," she said softly. "You're beautiful, aren't you?" Rick reached her first, pressing his scaled snout against her palm. His crystalline teeth were centimeters from her wrist. One bite could sever the hand completely. Instead, he made that chirping sound again and nuzzled closer. Sari arrived moments later, circling Ilara once before pressing against her other side. The cubs began making a deep rumbling sound like distant thunder, which meant they felt safe. In the observation deck, Professor Thane's mandibles clicked in confusion. Impossible. They should be attacking. The human produces fear pheromones like any prey species. His assistant checked her scanner and made a small whistling sound. "Professor, the human isn't producing fear pheromones. According to this, her stress hormones are barely elevated. She's calm." Ilara sat cross-legged on the floor, allowing both cubs to climb into her lap. Rick draped himself across her thighs while Sari curled against her chest, tucking her head under Ilara's chin. Within moments, both cubs had closed their eyes, the rumbling intensifying as they fell asleep. The lecture hall was absolutely silent. Ilara looked up at her stunned students and smiled. "Lesson 1, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the predator cubs using her as a bed. Predatory species don't simply seek weakness, they seek predictability. Fear is predictable. Aggression is predictable. But confidence without threat? That confuses their threat assessment algorithms." She gently stroked Sari's scales, which shifted to a lighter shade of blue. "Vexhounds are apex predators, yes, but they're also social creatures who value stability in their pack structure. When you panic, you become prey. When you attack, you become a rival. But when you remain calm and present yourself as neither threat nor victim, she gestured to the sleeping cubs, you become something they don't have a protocol for. A Krunian student, his translator crackling with emotion, asked, but how did you know they wouldn't attack? Ilara considered the question. I didn't, not with certainty. But humans evolved alongside apex predators for millions of years. We learned to read body language, to project confidence without aggression. We became endurance hunters who pursued prey for days across African plains. We domesticated wolves, animals that could easily kill us, and made them family. She looked down at Rick, who had begun snoring softly. We've always been good at befriending things that should terrify us. Professor Thane descended from the observation deck, his expression unreadable. He approached Ilara slowly, studying the sleeping cubs with all four eyes. Dr. Venn, he said finally, his voice lacking its usual condescension, I designed this exercise to demonstrate human inadequacy in xenobiology. I know, Ilara replied pleasantly. Your assistant talks during staff meetings. Thane's scales rippled, a Crelian blush. Instead, you have demonstrated something I did not expect. Perhaps... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Perhaps humans bring a perspective we have overlooked. Ilara smiled but said nothing. Rick shifted in her lap, one paw extending to rest on her arm, claws carefully retracted. The lecture continued with both cubs still sleeping soundly against the human professor. Students took detailed notes, asked questions, and observed how Ilara maintained calm even as one of the most dangerous juvenile predators in the galaxy drooled on her shoulder. When the class ended and Professor Thane finally retrieved Rick and Sari, requiring treats to coax them away from Ilara, the cubs looked back at her repeatedly, chirping their distress at being separated from their chosen guardian. As students filed out, the Dravine who had whimpered earlier approached Ilara's podium. Professor, he said, his mechanical voice uncertain, how do I learn to be that brave? Ilara packed her materials and considered the question seriously. It's not about being fearless, she said. It's about understanding that every creature, no matter how dangerous, is just trying to survive in a universe that's bigger and scarier than they are. When you remember that, she gestured to where the cubs had slept, fear becomes understanding, and understanding becomes connection. The student nodded slowly and departed. Alone in the lecture hall, Ilara noticed scale fragments on her clothing where the cubs had shed. She smiled, carefully collecting them for analysis. Outside, the twin moons of the academy world rose over the campus, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear Rick and Sari calling out, still chirping that sound reserved for family.